Hello, in this video we're picking up where we left off in the previous video, and that is at the top of page 545, section 14.6 in your book. And here we're going to talk about a few different concepts. One is the concept of a node. We'll kind of expand on that a little bit. As it says right up here at the top, it says the abstract node class defines many properties and methods that are common to all nodes. And that's kind of an important thing to latch onto, when we start talking about like the abstract, and you're thinking about it in general terms in much the same way that we think about, what a class brings to our program. So one of the things that they talk about, when we have common properties are things such as style and rotate. The really cool thing is since you already hopefully know your CSS at least to some degree, a lot of the style components that we'll be working with are not that dissimilar from what we do in CSS. The syntax is a little different, but really the concepts are the same in terms of how we work with colors and how we name things. And we've already played with it a little bit as we've worked, so you see some of these statements here. They really should not look that weird to you. You should be able to look at them and understand. Now, if you're not sure what a stroke is for an object, the stroke is the outline, basically, of the object, and a fill, obviously, is what goes inside. If you're not familiar with those terms, this is a good chance to start looking them up. So whenever you come into anything in this book and you're not familiar with it, it's time to do a little bit of research and try to fill those gaps. Now, this other one that we're going to be using too is the rotate property. And with the rotate property, we can take any object and apply this method to it and set a number of degrees, keeping in mind that a circle's got 360 degrees if you go all the way around. And so if we set it to 80, it's not quite going to go all the way to the 3 o'clock position on the clock. It would go slightly short of that, but it would rotate that many degrees based on what a circle is. Okay, let's move on now and take a look at this example here, and I'm actually not going to paste this one into Eclipse. I think that you guys kind of get the point there. If you want to go through the patient part of typing it in, please feel free. Basically what we're doing is a lot of what we've already done, and the parts that I'm going to point out here are the ones that are a little bit different. Now notice here that this new instance of the button that we're creating called BTOK, we are doing a set style method, and then notice the syntax here where it says -fx border color is blue. Very, very similar to CSS. In fact, if you just strike this beginning part of it, you'll see, in essence, it really is just like CSS. So it's not really a far stretch. Now, in this next little example, we're going to actually set the pane to rotate, not the button itself, but the pane that contains it. And then the pane also has a set style. Notice that its border color will be red, and the background color is going to be light gray. Now, they do have like a whole standard list of standard colors that work with the style element here, just like we do with CSS. So a lot of colors you can just very simply call by name. Alright, once we have that set up and you go ahead and you run it, you'll end up with something that looks like this. Of course, this is a black and white example, but you'll see that the whole pane that would normally sit inside the stage or inside the window is rotated that certain number of degrees. So hopefully that'll help to show you what it's kind of doing. Now, this next little segment here, we start to talk about color. And I mean, we've already been doing it, but there are all these different things that we can use that are built in. And notice here it says the getter methods for property values are provided in the class but omitted in the UML diagram for brevity. So what they're telling you is that they're kind of truncating things here just so they can get as much as they can up on the screen. Now, when you're working with these various values, notice that it says that the red, green, and blue values, and if you don't remember that from your HTML or CSS class, the colors that we use on a computer screen are identified as RGB colors, red, green, blue, and various combinations of those going from none at all to as much as possible. That, when mixed with the other colors, we can develop any color that we can put on a screen. When we're working with CSS, we work with values that go basically from 0 to 255, which is 256 possible values. And we either identify those with hex or abbreviated hex or using the RGB format. And there we just go from 0 to 255. And then there's the HSLA format too, which is a little bit different, but related. And here what we're doing is we're going between the values of 0 and 1, with 0 being the least amount of red and 1 being the most amount of red. And you can see, just like we have with that modern RGBA format that we use in CSS, we also have the opacity option, which can be very useful when you're trying to create certain types of effects, or just simply make objects disappear and appear. That's one method by which you can do it. All right, so I think that that's enough on that. I think you can read up on it yourself. It should, ring a bell at the very least. Notice here that there is this way that we can actually work with the color class. So in other words, when we are passing values in, we would pass them in the RGBO format. And so in other words, if we were to create a color, new color, I'm never a fan of naming it the same thing, but they do it here. Here's a possibility that we could enter. So a number from 0 to 1 indicating the percentage or the strength of that color, and then the final one being the opacity. And there are a lot of standard colors. You can go look those up if you wish. Chances are, if you know the name of a color and you type it in, chances are, as long as you spell it right, it'll work to at least some degree. All right. Another thing that we can work with is the font class. And this is obviously pretty important. I mean, we don't have to go with default system fonts. We can actually designate the ones that we want to use, either by name or by type. And you can see here they're just identifying, in this example, sans serif. And here we're identifying actually the name of the font, which is Times New Roman. We can also identify font weight and posture, they call it here, which is kind of interesting, italic, and you should know what those are. And then finally, as you would guess, that 12 indicates the size of the font. Here, once again, we are looking at the structure of how that works, and I think that this should make sense to you. I mean, if you're actually to read through, these are the different things that we can adjust. So the size, the name, and the family of the font. And then if you want to pass in certain parameters as you're going, or arguments, depending on how you receiving or sending, will be the number of things that you pass in. So you can see that depending on what you pass in, it will adjust and apply. Alright, so let's take a look at these combination examples here. The one thing that we're going to notice right off the bat is when they're creating a circle and they're setting the fill, notice that they're declaring a new color right inside the fill. So instead of just saying color black, we're saying a new color, and we're defining it and giving it an opacity. The other thing that we're doing is we are actually setting up what they call a label here, so we're naming it, and then we're setting the font for it. And be mindful of the syntax here. So once we have the object created, we are saying label set font, and then we're invoking a method within font for the font type. It's bold, italic, size 20. And then, of course, the next part of it is going to be to put it up on the screen. Not a very exciting example, but I think that you get the point, at least on a primitive level, on how you put these things together. Let's move on to section 14.9. Now we're at the bottom of page 549. And this is an important area too. We are looking at the image and ImageView classes, and the reason that these are important, as it indicates here, that the image class represents a graphical image, and the ImageView can be used to display an image. So you can see that one names the image, the other displays the image, and that combination is what we're going to need to do in order to get images up on the screen, that being images aside from images that we would create. So in other words, we're not going to create the shape, we're actually going to pull in an external resource and use that on the stage or within the pane or scene. Notice some of the syntax here where it says image equals new image, and then we point to the location of the file. Of course, this is going to be relative to the path of the project that we're working on. So just like we do when we're creating our web pages, or as you should have seen in other application programming languages, that it's not a bad idea to separate content into logical folders that you can access in a predictable way. So if you're used to creating a folder called image or images or pics or whatever you call it, be consistent. Once again, now they're giving us a little UML diagram, and they have a couple of different things that can happen, and obviously they're looking at what the height and the width of the image are, and the other one is whether the image is loaded correctly. So is the image even there? Is the image complete? Etc. When we come to the image view, notice the difference here with the options above. So we do have a height and a width here, but here we have fit height and fit width. We also have an X and Y for, as you would guess, positioning. And then we actually have a property here for the image itself, meaning what image are we loading. Alright, so let's take a look at this example, and you'll find this helpful as you're working on some of that first homework. And what's going on here is basically that we are creating, as usual, we're creating a stage. We're putting a pane inside of it. Notice that we're creating a new H-box, and we're setting the padding. Now, once again, very CSS-like. And notice the terminology here: set padding, new insets, 5, 5, 5, 5. And then we're declaring a new image. Alright. And then we're doing the get children add. And in this case now we are invoking a new image view of that image. So you see how that gets all nested inside there. And the nesting can get pretty complex, but once you see the pattern of it, it really becomes no big deal. Alright, so then we set up an ImageView 2. So once again, there's that new image. We set the fit, height, and width. Bring in ImageView 2. We set up an ImageView 3. We set that one to rotate. And then ultimately, we use these to show everything. And you can see what we're doing, if you come back, is we have one where the image is just coming in. We have another one where we're setting the height and width to be proportional at 100 pixels each. And then finally, we're taking the third one and we're rotating it 90 degrees. We are doing 3 separate image views, of the same image. So that's why we can say ImageView 3 equals new ImageView image, because we're really using the same original source image, but we're doing 3 different things with it in the image view. So that really should kind of show to you that we can take one particular source object, then create various views from that object and manipulate each view separately. And that can be a powerful little tool because we're still only loading one image, but we're manipulating that image to get certain effects. Now, here we are starting to talk about the H-box with a little bit more detail. And notice that an H-box, it says, is a pane that places all nodes horizontally in one row. So not only are we creating an image view, but that image view is a node. So we create one node, 2 nodes, the third node, all within one H-box. So it's forcing each item that renders within it to render in a horizontal box. Alright, and I think we did a okay job of explaining some of the stuff that they're doing here. So the other thing that you might want to consider is the fact that you can actually pull in images from external resources if it's appropriate or necessary. So we have that capability too. So we're not just locked into what's local on our file system. Another really important concept is what we call layout panes. And it says here that JavaFX provides many types of panes for automatically laying out nodes in a desired location and size. So this is going to be one of the keys that we're going to need in order to develop some of the little simple applications that are at the end of the chapter in the exercises. All right, let's take a look at this list very quickly. Now the first one says it's a pane, so that's like the basic. That does contain that getChildren method. The stack pane allows nodes to sit on top of each other. The flow pane places the nodes row by row horizontally or column by column vertically. There's a grid pane that puts everything in a two-dimensional grid. And then there's a border pane that puts things in the top, right, bottom, and left and center regions, so you can select those. And then we have the H-box, which we just saw, and the V-box. Now notice that all of these do share some of these properties, but this one in particular is directed towards the flow pane. So the flow pane will indicate alignment, orientation, and then H-gap. So I think you can guess what that is, horizontal or vertical gap, and that would be in pixels between objects. So notice now that the alignment would be something that you would already be familiar with, and they're giving an example here. For example, position left is default, as it is with most text. The orientation object property, that would indicate which way are we going. Are we going horizontal or are we going vertical? And I think that gives you a pretty good idea of what's happening. Alright, so let's go ahead now and take a look at this example. In this example, the flow pane equals a new flow pane. That's the first highlighted part here. So that is kind of a new thing for us. We are going to set padding. Remember the syntax here. The padding actually goes in as insets. And actually that's a pretty appropriate term because remember padding pushes in from the edge of an object, pushing inwards. So here we're going to do insets of 11, 12, 13, and 14. And we have a horizontal and vertical gap of 5. The next thing that we're going to do, and it tells us, we're going to put the nodes inside of a pane. So with the pane, we're going to get the children. So that's going to pull in all pane objects. and then we're going to add all of them, and we're going to throw in a label. Now that label, notice here that we're throwing in many parameters here. We're add all, so we're going to throw in the label first name, a new text field, and then a new label, mi:. Now here we're declaring a new text field named tfmi. You see the syntax there. There's nothing being passed in. And then we are going to set column count to 1. Now you'll see what the point of that is in just a moment. And then we're also going to create a new label and a new text field for last name. So I don't think it's too hard to figure out what's going on here. Basically, we are creating a first name, a text field, a new label for middle initial, another text field, a new label for last name, and another text field. So it's not that much different than basically putting together like an HTML form. It's just a different syntax, but the concepts really are very similar. Next thing that we're going to do, as it says, is create a scene and place it in the stage. So here we have that new scene. We've declared a pane, and we got a 200 by 250. And we're going to set the title, set the scene, and do a show. So let's move on to the next page so you can see what we did. And it says here, the nodes fill in the rows in the flow pane one after another. So it will fill in based upon how you've entered it in code-wise. Now it'll take a little bit of experimenting to get the result, but they do write it in this fashion for a particular reason. So play with it a little bit, move things around, and see what kind of results you get. And I think that you'll find it interesting. Alright, now they do a little bit of an explanation of what it does, and I think I've explained a good number of these things already. Now the vertical and horizontal gaps, I think we get a concept of that. Notice we have top, right, bottom, left, just like what we do in HTML. And then we also indicate where's the top, where's the bottom, and then you can adjust all of those things. Now they have a little bit more information here about that, and I'll let you read through that. But I like this little note here at the bottom where he says a node can be placed only in one pane. Therefore, the relationship between a pane and a node is the composition denoted by a filled diamond as shown in figure 14.3. So if that makes sense to you, what he just said is just really the key there is that a node can be placed only in one pane. So it cannot exist in more than one at a time, and that has to do with how we're going to be manipulating it. On the next page here, we're looking at another new construct, and this is called the grid pane. And as it indicates here, it basically forms a matrix. So you can think of columns and rows, and then the nodes are placed in particular row and column numbers. So we basically are forming kind of like a spreadsheet where every row and column is named in some capacity. Take a look at some of the properties that happen here. We can set alignment, whether or not the grid lines are visible or not. Now, a rule of thumb, as with working with tables in HTML, sometimes it's good to actually put the lines in initially so you can see where things lay out and then remove them. Of course, you always have to compensate for that 1 pixel or however many pixels that you're working with. And we also have all these various methods here, so we can create the grid pane, and we can add columns, rows, and get the index values, adjust the heights and the alignments, and all that is very, very HTML table-like. Now the point of that in this example, and this is pretty much the same thing I teach in HTML, is how we can take that simple form content that we saw in the previous example and line it up so it looks nice, and that is actually done by using the grid pane. So we actually lay out the grid and then put the stuff in. And that would seem kind of intuitive, but a lot of times when people are trying to make screens look symmetrical, they forget that that's really a common tool. And one of the reasons why tables, even though they I guess are technically deprecated, really are never going to go away, because they're tools that really work quite well and are very consistent. And that structure really has been mimicked here. Now, notice some of the syntax here. None of this stuff is particularly new yet, except for the grid pane, but also see that that pane is set position center, so it'll sit in the middle of the screen or the stage. Then we also have our padding set. Notice the padding amounts. And then we have our horizontal and vertical gaps set. And then in this next section, we are actually, it says placing nodes in the pane. Now, what do these numbers mean? Well, if you think about it, if you look at that previous visual example, if you can envision that there's a grid sitting around this, and that there's maybe a column or two, and 1, 2, 3, it looks like 4 rows, and 2 columns. That's what it looks like to me. If you keep that in mind as you're looking at these numbers, why would first name be in position 0, 0? Well, when we're counting on a computer pretty much every time we do that, you could call this row 0, row 1, row 2, etc., column 0, column 1, etc. So then first name goes into position 0, 0. The text field 1, 0. So why is the 1 first and the 0 second? What would that indicate to you? That this is the column number, column and row. So column 1, row 0. Alright, now we move on to the next one, column 0, row 1, and etc. until you get all the stuff put into that grid pane. And I think it's actually pretty intuitive once you wrestle with it a little bit, and that is a grid pane. Alright, let's look now at border pane. Now, border pane is another type of pane, and notice that it allows us to set certain properties here, the top, right, bottom, and left. And then, the acronym I always use for that, because it's the same order as you get in CSS, is trouble, TRBL. And then we have a center property as well that allows you to put it in that particular position. So in this case, they're doing a show border pane. Take a look now at what they're doing. So they just create a new border pane. They set the top to say top, right, bottom, left. I think those are all pretty intuitive. And then we're also setting the center, and all of them are just getting text. Alright, then we move on here and we set the scene, stage title, set scene, and show. So that's what's going to get it up onto the screen. But here's something that we're doing that's a little new. It says define a custom pane to hold a label in the center of the pane. So here we're actually creating a little class file, and we're calling it custom pane, and it extends the stack pane. So think about what that's doing. And remember, a stack pane allows you to layer things. That's what's going on. And then we are going to add a new label. It's going to have the title. And then we are looking at setting some styles, some border color, and then some padding. And then ultimately what happens is we end up with an object that looks like this. Now, this might seem kind of like an awkward little structure, but the reality is if you look at it, you can see that really that creates, in a rudimentary fashion at the very least, kind of what we think of in terms of applications and the way the space is used within a screen for an application. So in other words, it's not uncommon to have like a header and a footer, and a content area, and little sidebars. Those are very common things that we see, not just on web pages, but in applications as well. So this border pane tool gives us that capability of kind of creating that multi-pane area. Now, we just put text into these areas, but you could put anything into these areas. Other controls, you could put images, text, what have you. Alright, now here they actually go formally into talking about HBox and VBox. And as you see here, HBox lays out all its children in a single row, and VBox lays out all its children in a single vertical column. Alright, so we can actually use these to do a number of different things. Notice the different properties we have available to us: alignment, the fill, height, the spacing, and that's true with both of these, except this one's width as opposed to height. And here we have a little bit of an example where we're getting these HBox and VBox constructs in there, and we're using them now within a border pane. And so you're going to see how we're going to use one to augment another, basically. Alright, so we have in this segment here, it says set top and set left, so you can picture what that's going to do. So the very top of the screen and then the left side of the screen. And for each one of those, we're going to set an HBox, and that makes sense if you think about how that diagram looks. So HBox makes sense here, and a VBox would make sense here. Alright, and we go through all the standard set the scene, title, and show it. And then here we are actually setting up the HBox and the VBox, and notice how we're doing a get. And so we declare it, we set our padding, style, I think it's self-explanatory. We throw in some buttons, text for the buttons, throw in an image, do an image view. Here in the vertical box we're doing something similar, but we're expanding it a little bit. This is a little bit more straightforward. In this one, when we get past this declaration here, we do set up a new label, and then notice here that we're setting up an array, and for each one of these we say new label, and we throw in all the various ones, and then it says, and you should be able to figure this out, for label courses, we set the margin, so we're bumping it in so it's top, right, bottom, left. So we're 15 over from the left for each one of those items. So this is actually a for statement where we are going through each one of these array items, and we're going to put them on the screen 15 pixels away from the left side of the screen. So here we have the top where things are flowing. There's the two buttons and the flag. So that's a horizontal box in the top part of a border pane, and here is a VBox in the left part of a border pane. So I think that that really demonstrates a lot of pretty key concepts right there. I'm going to halt this video here, and we're going to pick up in the next video at this point.